My name is Elaine Garris. I am 41 years old. On March 14th, at approximately 7:22 in the evening, my younger sister Brooke told a table of 14 guests at her engagement dinner that Black Viper had never intimidated her during the most demanding phase of joint tactical evaluation she had ever completed. She said it while gesturing toward me with a breadstick, the way someone gestures toward a coat rack they've forgotten is in the room. The invoice for that dinner, which I paid in full, came to $4,117.63. I still have the receipt. It is Exhibit 1. Mouf Dom Tabac. I registered the number before anything else. Not the insult, not the laughter that followed, not the way my mother patted Brooke's arm as though she had said something delightful. The number, $4,117.63, for a dinner at which my sister used a classified call sign she did not have clearance to reference, in a restaurant she could not afford, in front of people she was trying to impress with a career built partially on credentials she had allowed others to misattribute. My hands were flat on the tablecloth, white linen, damp from a water ring left by a glass I had not touched in 11 minutes. I could feel the texture of the weave against my fingertips and I did not move. I was already cataloging. That was their fourth misrepresentation in 37 days. I had documented the first 3, noted. She did not hear me say it. Nobody did. It was not for the room. It was for the file I had been building since February, when a discrepancy in a training evaluation crossed my desk with my sister's name on it and a competency signature that did not match the hand I had watched sign birthday cards for 34 years. Before I lay out what I found and what it cost them when I did, I want to know something. What time is it where you are? I have learned to note the time of things. It matters more than people realize. Every document I am about to describe has a timestamp. Every conversation has a date. Every lie has a moment it was told, and that moment can be verified. Remember that. I am a forensic document examiner. I have been one for 16 years, first for the Department of Defense in a civilian analytical capacity, then as a contractor specializing in signature authentication, metadata analysis, and document integrity verification for military administrative proceedings. My hands know things before my mind names them. I can feel the difference between a signature written at natural speed and one drawn carefully from memory. I can look at a block of text and tell you which font was native to the system that generated it, and which was pasted in from a second machine. I once identified a fraudulent requisition order because the kerning between 2 letters was 1/10 of a millimeter wider than the template allowed, and my eye caught it before I could explain why I had stopped reading. That skill had exposed procurement fraud, falsified service records, and forged authorization letters across 11 military installations for over a decade. It was about to dismantle my own sister's career file, document by document, starting with the evaluation she had been telling everyone she passed. I need to go back further than March to explain why the number on that receipt made me go still instead of angry. Brooke is 6 years younger than me. She was born into a family that had already decided what excellence looked like, and it looked like noise. My father, Gerald Garris, retired from the Army as a master sergeant with 22 years of service, and a voice that could fill any room he chose to occupy. My mother, Sandra, was a school administrator who ran parent-teacher conferences with the crisp efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that volume equals authority. Brooke inherited both instincts. She could command a room by the time she was 9. She played 3 sports, sang in 2 choirs, ran for student government and won, and narrated her own accomplishments with a fluency that made you feel like you were watching a highlight reel produced in real time. I was the other one. The one who sat in the corner of the living room with a magnifying glass and a stack of old letters my grandmother had left behind, comparing the handwriting across decades, noticing how the loops changed after her arthritis diagnosis, how the pressure lightened after my grandfather died. My mother thought it was a phase. She told relatives I was going through a detective period, the way she might describe a child's interest in dinosaurs, something to outgrow. My father simply did not know what to do with a daughter who found a forged hall pass more interesting than a football game. He was not cruel about it. He was just absent in the specific way a man becomes absent when he cannot locate his own reflection in his child's face. When Brooke enlisted and began climbing through officer training with the kind of visible, reportable momentum that produces congratulatory phone calls and refrigerator-worthy photographs, the family narrative settled into its permanent shape. Brooke was the achiever, I was the technician. She was the story, I was the footnote. I accepted a civilian analyst contract with the DoD at 25. My work was not classified in the dramatic, cinematic sense people imagine when they hear that word. It was classified in the tedious sense: forms, databases, chain of custody logs. I spent years in windowless rooms verifying whether documents were what they claimed to be. I was good at it. Then I became very good at it. Then I became the person other examiners consulted when they could not determine what they were looking at. None of this translated to dinner conversation. You cannot tell your mother you identified a forged logistics authorization that prevented $1.2 million in misallocated funds when she is in the middle of describing how Brooke placed first in a tactical leadership exercise. You learn to let the silence do its work. You learn to eat your potatoes and nod. The irony is that I had spent 16 years identifying documents that misrepresented the truth about who did what and when, and I never once turned that lens on the stories being told inside my own family. I examined everything except the one narrative I was living inside. The call sign is relevant. Black VIPER was assigned to me during a joint evaluation cycle 9 years ago, not a combat designation, an analytical one. I was embedded with a tactical assessment team responsible for validating field exercise outcomes, ensuring that scores, evaluations, and after-action reports matched what had actually occurred. My role was verification. If someone claimed an objective was completed at a specific time, I confirmed or denied it through documentation. If a score sheet showed a number, I traced it back to the raw data. The name came from a senior evaluator named Colonel Martin Ardell, who told me during a debrief that I reminded him of a viper because I sat perfectly still for hours and then struck at exactly the one discrepancy nobody else had noticed. It was not a glamorous name, it was an accurate one, and inside certain evaluation circles it carried weight, because every officer who had been through a cycle I worked knew that Black VIPER's verification was the one you could not argue with. Brooke went through a joint tactical evaluation 18 months ago. She was assigned to a unit running a complex field exercise with live scoring, multiple evaluators, and a final competency review that would affect her next promotion consideration. I was not on her evaluation team. I need to be clear about that. I had recused myself the moment I saw her name on the roster. I filed the paperwork, I stepped out, I did everything protocol required. What I did not know, until February of this year, was that my recusal created a gap, and someone filled that gap with a signature. On February 9th, I was reviewing a batch of archived evaluation files as part of a routine audit for a different case entirely. File number 7741B, Brooke's evaluation. I was not looking for it. It appeared in a cross-referenced index because the scoring template matched one flagged in a separate inquiry. I opened it for procedural reasons. What I found was a competency sign-off sheet bearing the initials EG and a signature that, at a glance, looked like mine. I had not signed it. I had never seen the document. My recusal was on file. Someone had placed my credentials on a verification I did not perform. I stared at that signature on my screen for a long time. The cursor blinked. The office was cold, the kind of cold you get in basement-level government buildings, where the thermostat serves a suggestion more than a function. My coffee had gone lukewarm, and I had not touched it. Something in my chest went very still, not anger, something beneath anger. Something that was already running calculations I had not asked it to run. The slant was wrong, not dramatically wrong, almost correct. The downstroke on the G was 3 degrees steeper than my natural hand, and the crossbar on the E extended 1/16 of an inch past where I habitually stop it. A civilian would not have noticed. Most examiners would have needed a comparison set and a light table. I saw it the way a pianist hears a wrong note in a chord, instantly and irreversibly. Then I found something else. The metadata on the digital file showed it had been created on a machine assigned to a Lieutenant Jason Pruitt, an administrative officer attached to the evaluation unit. The file properties listed the author as J. Pruitt, the creation date as November 3rd, 3 days after Brooke's evaluation was completed, and the last modified date as November 5th. My recusal was filed on October 12th. No legitimate process would have generated a document bearing my initials on a machine I had never accessed, 3 days after an evaluation I had formally removed myself from. I pulled the original scoring template from the archived server. I compared the font rendering character by character. The original template used Calibri at 11 point. The sign-off sheet used Calibri at 11 point, but the ligature rendering between the F and the I in certification was consistent with a copy-paste from a Word document, not a native PDF field entry. The difference is invisible to anyone who has not spent a decade looking at exactly this kind of thing. To me, it was a floodlight in a dark room. I did not call Brooke. I did not call my parents. I pulled Lieutenant Pruitt's access logs for the relevant date range and cross-referenced them with his duty schedule. On November 3rd, he was logged into the evaluation archive system at 21:47, more than 2 hours after his shift ended. I submitted a formal records request for the original evaluation scoring data, the raw numbers before any competency review was applied. When those numbers arrived, I placed them beside the final signed report and read them line by line. Brooke's raw score on the critical judgment component was a 68. The minimum threshold for competency certification was 70. The signed report listed her score as 74. Someone had moved the number, someone had forged my name to validate the movement, and someone had filed it as though the entire process had been routine. The document I found that afternoon made everything before it irrelevant. Not because it was worse, because it was first. I pulled Pruitt's personnel file and found that he had been Brooke's classmate in an earlier training cycle. They had maintained a professional relationship, or what looked like one on paper. But when I retrieved the email archive, I found 11 messages between them over a 6-week window, each one more specific than the last. The earliest was casual. The last one, sent the night before the evaluation scores were due, read, "Just make sure it clears threshold. She'll handle the rest." That was layer 3. It was not spontaneous, it was arranged. Layer 4 arrived quietly, the way the worst things always do. I requested the historical evaluation files for the 2 previous cycles Brooke had completed. In both cases, a competency sign-off had been filed with initials that on first glance appeared to belong to the reviewing examiner. In both cases, the metadata told a different story. Different machines, different timestamps, same pattern. The scores in both prior evaluations had been adjusted upward by small amounts, never more than 6 points, never enough to draw attention. The signature forgeries were not identical to one another or to the one bearing my initials. They were adapted each time, just different enough to look independent. But the method was the same. Template manipulation, post-filing modification, a signature applied after the fact, calibrated to pass a cursory review. Brooke had not simply cheated once. She had been running a system, and someone, likely Pruitt, had been building her file for her, one forged verification at a time, for almost 4 years. I compiled everything into a single indexed file, 147 pages, cross-referenced, time-stamped, every exhibit labeled. I did not editorialize. I did not speculate on motive. I presented what the documents showed, and let the documents do what documents do when they are arranged in the correct order. The engagement dinner on March 14th was held at a restaurant called Bellamy's, a converted mill building with exposed brick and pendant lighting that Brooke had chosen because she said it looked like the kind of place where important people eat. She had organized the dinner herself, 14 guests. Our parents, Pruitt and his wife, several officers from Brooke's current unit, 2 friends from college, and me, seated at the far end of the table, next to an empty chair that had been set for a guest who canceled. Brooke made her toast 20 minutes after the main course arrived. She thanked the room for supporting her career. She described the joint evaluation as the hardest thing she had ever done. She talked about finishing at the top of her scoring bracket, and then, turning to one of the officers at the table, who had mentioned the name in passing, she laughed and said, "Black Viper? Please. Black Viper never intimidated me. I don't care what anyone says about that evaluation cycle. I came through clean." She looked at me when she said it. Not accidentally. My sister has always known where to aim. I set my fork down. I reached for the glass of water I had ordered instead of wine. I took one sip. I placed the glass back on the tablecloth, precisely where it had been, and I said nothing. 3 weeks later, I requested a formal meeting through Colonel Ardell's office. The meeting was held in the Evaluation Review Boardroom at the installation where Brooks' file was housed. Long oak table, overhead fluorescents, a projector screen mounted to the far wall. Brooke had been in this room exactly once before to receive the results of her evaluation. She believed this room belonged to her record. She did not know her record was about to be corrected in the same space where it had been certified. Brooke arrived in full uniform, looking like she expected a procedural briefing. Prewitt sat 2 chairs away, looking less certain. My parents had not been invited. Colonel Ardell sat at the head of the table, with 2 members of the Inspector General's preliminary review panel. I placed the first exhibit on the table, the competency sign-off bearing my forged initials. I stated what it was, I stated when it was created, I stated that I had not signed it. Brooks' response was immediate. That's not what happened. That signature was already on the file when I received my results. I had nothing to do with the administrative process. I placed the second exhibit, the metadata printout showing the file's author and creation time. Brooke leaned forward. You're doing this because you've always resented my success. This is jealousy, not investigation. I placed the third exhibit, the email chain between Prewitt and my sister. I did not read it aloud. I slid it across the table and waited. Prewitt spoke for the first time. The circumstances were unusual. Her scores were borderline. Anyone in my position would have. Colonel Ardell raised one hand. Prewitt stopped. Brooke tried again. After everything I've given to this career, after everything this family has sacrificed, you're going to sit there and tear it apart over a technicality? I placed the fourth exhibit. The historical pattern, 3 evaluations, 3 forged sign-offs, 3 adjusted scores. I let the documents sit on the table in a row, evenly spaced, facing her. Then Colonel Ardell did something I had not anticipated. He reached into a folder beside him and produced a separate document, an independent verification report, compiled by a senior examiner named Dr. Irene Yu, a civilian specialist who had been asked by the IG's office to conduct a blind review of Brooks' evaluation file 6 weeks earlier. Dr. Yu's conclusions, arrived at without any contact with me or knowledge of my findings, matched mine on every material point. Different methodology, same result. Her report was 17 pages. It confirmed the forgeries, the score adjustments, and the pattern. Brooke stared at the document. She looked at Ardell. She looked at Prewitt, who had gone the color of the table. Brooke does not falsify documents out of malice, I said. My voice was level. I was not performing calm. I was calm, the way I am calm when I am reading a document for the 100th time, and the truth has become so clear it no longer requires volume. She falsifies them because she decided a long time ago that being exceptional was the only acceptable outcome, and she never developed the capacity to survive being ordinary for even one evaluation cycle. The room went quiet. I did not elaborate. I had said what the documents proved. Prewitt's disciplinary proceedings began within the week. He was removed from his administrative role, reassigned pending a full investigation, and eventually received a formal reprimand and reduction in grade. His wife Laura, who had sat at the engagement dinner laughing at Brooks' toast, filed for separation in April. She told a mutual acquaintance she had not known what Jason was doing, and I believed her, though belief and evidence are not the same thing, and I have learned to hold them in separate hands. Brooks' evaluation results for the 3 affected cycles were vacated. All 3. The competency certifications were withdrawn. Her promotion timeline was suspended pending review. The engagement, which had been the occasion for the dinner, where she told 14 people that Black Viper had never intimidated her, was quietly postponed, and then by June cancelled entirely. I do not know the details. Brooke did not tell me, and I did not ask. My father called me on a Tuesday evening in late April. His voice was careful, the way it gets when he is trying to say something he has not rehearsed. He asked me why I had not simply warned Brooke privately before filing the report. I told him the truth, because the forgery bearing my initials made me a party to fraud I did not commit. Because 3 evaluation cycles had been compromised. Because every officer who had been scored honestly during those same cycles deserved to know the results were not tainted by someone else's manufactured numbers. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he understood, and I believed he meant it, though I also understood that meaning it and feeling at peace with it were not the same thing. My mother took longer. She did not call me for 6 weeks. When she finally did, she asked if I was happy now. I told her I was not happy. I told her I had never been happy about any of this. I told her that filing the report had felt like removing a bone from my own hand, precise and necessary and painful, in a way that did not diminish with time. She cried. I let her. Then she asked if Brooke could appeal, and I told her that was between Brooke and the review board, and that I would not be involved in any capacity. That boundary held. Brooke did not contact me for 3 months. When she did, it was a single text message sent at 11:40 at night. It said, "I know you didn't do this to hurt me." That was all. I read it in bed with the lamp on and the ceiling fan turning above me, and I did not reply that night. Not because I did not want to, because I had learned by then that some responses need time to be worthy of the admission that prompted them. Laura Pruitt reached out to me in May. She had found my office number through the installation directory. She wanted to know if I had known about Jason's involvement before the engagement dinner. I told her I had suspected it after February and confirmed it in early March. She asked why I had not told her directly. I said, honestly, that I had waited and decided the formal process would protect her more reliably than a private warning that could be denied. She was quiet. Then she said, "You're probably right. I just wish being right felt better." I told her I understood that particular wish intimately. The secondary character who surprised me most was my father. Gerald Garris, who had spent 30 years believing that the loudest achievement in the room was the most important one, began doing something I had not expected. He started asking me questions. Not about Black VIPER. Not about the investigation. About my work. What I did on a daily basis. How document examination actually functioned. What I saw when I looked at a signature. He asked with the cautious curiosity of a man who had realized he had been living in a house with someone he had never actually met. It was not a dramatic reconciliation. It was a series of small, slightly awkward phone calls over several months in which my father practiced the unfamiliar act of being interested in the daughter he had spent decades categorizing as the quiet one. In August, he visited my office. He stood in the doorway the way Brooke had once stood in hers, and he looked at the comparison microscope on my desk, the light table, the rows of archived reference samples, and he said, "I had no idea this is what you did." He did not apologize in that moment. The apology came later, over dinner, halting and imperfect, and it did not cover everything. It covered enough. Brooke's formal review concluded in September. She retained her commission but was placed on a supervised development track with a mandatory mentorship component. The review board's recommendation included a stipulation that her future evaluations be subject to independent verification for a period of 3 years. Her career was not over, it was corrected. And I think, though I cannot be certain, that the correction may eventually make her better at the work than the fraud ever could have. In October, I accepted a teaching appointment at the Defense Forensic Institute, something I had been offered twice before and declined both times because the family's orbit around Brooke's career had made it feel selfish to pursue something that would require me to relocate. I took it this time. I moved into a small apartment near the campus, with good light and a desk positioned under a window where I can work in the mornings before class. I hung my credentials on the wall, not for anyone else, for the 16 years of work they represented and the years still ahead. I think about the cost of false records, not just on the person they were built to protect, but on everyone they touched without knowing it. Every officer scored fairly beside a file that had been altered, every evaluator whose judgment was overridden by a forged initial, every family member who built their pride on a version of events that was never verified. A false record does not only deceive the person who reads it, it deceives the person it describes. Brooke spent years inside a story that told her she had cleared every threshold cleanly. She believed it, and believing it made her incapable of hearing the one thing that might have made her genuinely exceptional, that she was not yet as good as she thought she was. The cruelty of a forged record is not the lie itself. It is that the lie steals the chance to grow from the person it was meant to protect. I keep the receipt from Bellamy's in the top drawer of my new desk, $4,117.63. Not as evidence, not as a grievance, as a reference point, the last document from a version of my family's record that no longer stands. Beside it, there is a new document, my teaching contract, my name, correctly attributed, my credentials, independently verified, my signature, in my own hand, at my own natural slant, on a record that belongs to no one but me.